Last week, as I mentioned, Clay from his house, he kicked off this sermon series that we're doing called Living Open-Handed. And what does that mean? What does it mean to live open-handed? At its heart, here's what it means. It means to live a generous life. We want to be generous people. That's what it means to live open-handed. People who are known for our generosity. People who live like this. Not people who live like this, right? But people who live with the open hand. Passionate followers of Jesus, we believe, are generous people. And so I think it's important to talk about generosity a lot. I feel like I've talked about it a lot in the last year and a half since I moved into this role. We can always talk about it more. But I feel like I've talked about it plenty. However, if you're like most people, when it comes to generosity, it's easy to fall into a misconception about generosity and what it is. If you're like most people, you might have a misconception about generosity, and that would be that generosity is really all about money. Yeah, that's all about money. And if you think that, if you feel like that, you're pretty normal, all right? It's a misconception, though, because generosity is not primarily about money. It's not the definition of generosity to give money away. That's not what the primary focus of generosity is. It's not the most important part at all. And so, some of you can take a breath and relax because we're not going to talk about money today. We didn't talk about it last week. Clay did. We're not going to talk about it next week. We're talking about generosity, but we're not talking about dollars and cents. You don't have to worry about that. Here's what generosity is. It's primarily a mindset. It's primarily a worldview, how you look at life in general. It's a worldview. It's not just about your bank account. It's so much bigger than dollars and cents. Here's what it means. Being generous means reflecting God's character and grace by giving without grasping for anything in return. Right? It does include money, right? But it's so much bigger than that. It's reflecting God's character and His grace, who He is, by giving without grasping for anything in return. It means that we live open-handed. There's so many different facets of our lives that this applies to, where we can reflect God's character. So for this sermon series, I have totally arbitrarily chosen 3, all right? 3 different areas of our lives, 3 facets of our lives. Last week, Clay talked about what it means to be generous with our time, right? Do we care enough with the finite amount of days, finite number of days that we have as human beings? Do we care enough about other people to give them our time? He talked about Ephesians 4, where it says, make the most of every opportunity as Christians. Do we do that? Do we care enough about people to give and point them towards Jesus with our time? Next week, we're going to talk about being generous with our tangibles, not with our money, but with the stuff that we own, right? The things that we can feel and smell in our lives. But today, we're gonna be in an area of life that I'm gonna bet that you have never considered this area that we're gonna talk about in terms of generosity. You've never probably put these 2 things together. But I think it's important because of the nature of the world that we live in today, what it's turned into in the last 20 years, probably since 25, 30 years since the internet has been around. It's important because we're so connected 24/7. And so what we're going to talk about today about living open-handed with your talk. All right? Living open-handed with your talk, with the words that you speak, the way that you communicate with people. That's what we're going to talk about. The things you speak in your workplace, the things you speak on the factory floor, the way you talk at home, the way you talk in your neighborhood, the things you type into, right, emails, the things you put on social media. That's what we're going to talk about, being open-handed with our talk. What does it look like to be generous with that? The Bible talks a lot about words, and it talks a lot about the potential and the power that they have in the way that we choose to speak and the way that we use them. Words shape lives. They shape lives. I think about previous generations. Go back to baby boomers. Maybe some of you are baby boomers, and go back even past that. I think about previous generations like that. My dad has talked about this with me himself. Think about how many fathers from those generations struggled or perhaps never said words to their sons like, "Son, you are okay. You are enough. I admire you, son. I love you." How many fathers from those generations struggled to say words like that? Fathers who struggled to say to their daughters, "You are beautiful, daughter. I love you. You are valued. You're like a piece of fine china in my life. I'm so glad." So many fathers struggled to say words like that. I'm so glad that my own dad decided to break that cycle that he learned from his father. That's how his father treated him. Rarely said that he loved him. My dad decided to break that cycle in my life and in my siblings' life. And I'm so glad that I heard messages of affirmation as we were growing up, because words have shaped my life. Virtually every day, somewhere in the news, you can find a story in the United States, maybe not every day, every month, let's say. You can find a story of a kid in the United States who died by suicide, can't you? Virtually every month, somebody in their school decided to use the amazing gift of words, and they used it to bully. Jocelyn Carranza, she was 11. She lived in Texas. Last month, she killed herself. One of the factors in why she did that was that there was a group of students at her school who decided to participate in a kind of a climate of verbal harassment over the immigration status of some Hispanic kids in their school. She's 11. She killed herself last week because words shape lives, right? They have lots of power. They have lots of potential. Have you ever wondered, of all the ways that God could have chosen to give us ways to communicate, why did he give us words? Why did he give us a tongue that is able to form thousands and maybe even hundreds of thousands and millions of words that we can communicate with each other? He didn't do that for everybody. We have a guinea pig at our house. You got his picture? Aww. He's a sweetie, isn't he? His name is Twitch. He's a guinea pig. I tell my girls that when he grows up, I'm going to turn him into bacon. They don't think that's very funny. Twitch he's a fascinating little rodent, is what he is. And one of the things that he is he's very social. He grew up actually with a buddy who has passed on to guinea pig afterlife, wherever that is. And so he lives by himself now in his cage. He loves to be around people. He's a very social creature. And so I like to sit in the front room with him. His cage is right beside my easy chair, and I'll sit down, I'll pull out my book, and he just likes it when somebody's sitting in the chair, and he'll be over there just making all kinds of sounds. He's chutting, and he's chirping, and he's weeking, and he's purring. Guinea pig experts say that guinea pigs have about a dozen sounds that they use to communicate every single thing that they want and need and feel in their life. A dozen, right? Why did God give us a million words and a million ways to communicate? He could have made us like guinea pigs. He could have made us like cows or dogs or dolphins, right? He could have done that. Twitch never miscommunicates. He never says the wrong thing, ever. God could have made us like that, but he didn't. Why not? Why did God give us this amazing gift of communication that he has when there's so much potential for things to go wrong? Here's what I think. I think that maybe God thought that the gift of communication that he has given us was worth the risk because our words have such incredible potential for good also, just as they have potential for evil. Your words and the way that you say them can literally change the entire course of a kid's life or your wife's life or your husband's life or an employee's wife or your neighbor or anybody. James was the half-brother of Jesus, and he wrote about our tongues and the ability that they give us to communicate. And James said that our tongue is such a small thing compared to the rest of our body, right? But it can do such amazing things in our life. And James said, consider what a great forest is set on fire by just a tiny spark. He said, your tongue is like that. I couldn't help but think of the wildfires, right? In LA, a couple months ago, $250 billion in damage, 12,000 or more families that their homes were burned down. They have no place to live, right? And all that started with a tiny little cigarette lighter, right? Or cigarette thrown to the side of the road, or maybe an arson. We don't know what it was, but right? It's such a great forest, such great damage was done. James also says that your tongue is like the rudder of a ship. You know that piece on the back down in the water, right? You turn the wheel up on top of the boat, and that rudder moves just a little bit, and that tiny little rudder, compared to the giant ship, is enough to change the entire direction. The entire course of where that ship is going to go is just changed by a small rudder on the back of the ship. Your speech has that kind of potential in your life also to do amazing things. And so here's a key question for today. If a gift that powerful exists in my life and it exists in your life, am I using it in a generous way? Am I using it for good? Or am I hoarding the gift of communication that I have? Am I maybe manipulating it or perverting that ability? It's a good question to ask yourself. Let me give you two crucial ways today that you and I, as passionate followers of Jesus, are called to generous speech. And the first one has to do with the content of our words, all right? The actual words themselves that we choose to use, the words themselves that come out of our mouth. And the second piece is going to have to do with our tone, the way we deliver those words. So let's start with the first one, the content piece. Here's your first truth for today. Passionate followers of Jesus liberally use their words to strengthen, not to weaken. To strengthen, not to weaken. I was talking with them to build up, not to tear down. I was talking with Clay last week after church about our topic for today, and he was telling me about how a few years ago he was working down at Western Michigan at the His House Ministry down there, and they did a series about how we communicate with each other. And as a part of it, they passed out stickers, and the stickers said, "Build up or shut up." I like that, right? If I'd have been on top of things, I would have done that. Build up or shut up. Our words have the power to do that. So we want to use our words to strengthen, not to weaken. Here's how Paul puts it in Ephesians chapter 4. And this is probably the main scripture we're going to look at today. We'll look at a couple others also. But Ephesians 4, verse 29, Paul says to the Christians, he says, "Hey, Christians in Ephesus," he says, "do not let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths." Unwholesome, all right? They use that unwholesome. Don't let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth. The word that Paul uses there, as the people at Ephesus are hearing that word, there's a mental picture that would come to their mind when they hear the word unwholesome. The mental picture that would come to their mind is a piece of spoiled fruit, like a rotten apple. Don't let a rotten apple come out of your mouth. They might also have a picture in their head of a piece of rancid meat. Right? Think of a hamburger that's been left out for 3 or 4 days. Right? Then he says don't let anything like that, anything unwholesome, come out of your mouth. And it's don't let anything rotten come out of your mouth. Don't let anything nasty come out. I'm a side sleeper. Anybody else a side sleeper? You sleep on your side. I cannot lay on my back to sleep. I've never been able to. I lay on my side. Sometimes I flip on my belly, but almost always on a side. I'm also a mouth breather. I got a septum that's a little crooked in there, and so it's kind of hard to breathe out my nose. I breathe out my mouth. So I'm laying there in bed every night, laying on my side with my mouth open. One of the worst things about that scenario as a side sleeper and a mouth breather is that you find yourself breathing into your pillow. You know what I mean? It's a nasty thing because your breath comes out, it's hot, right? And if you're a mouth breather, you tend to drool, and so you're just laying there on your pillow, right? And you're sleeping. I've figured out a technique, and some of you who are side sleepers have maybe figured this out. If you sleep on your side, you can do this. You can take your pillow and put like 99% of it back. Yeah, you side sleepers know what I'm talking about. So that this side of your face is out in open air, right? All of your pillows back here. You can breathe out here. You don't have to worry about anything. If you drool, it goes down on your sheet instead of on your pillow, so you're not laying in it, right? But here's the thing. The worst part of it is you wake up in the morning after you've got this nice situation that you've made. You wake up in the morning and things are all discombobulated, right? Because you've moved around during the night, or your spouse has stolen stuff, and things are wrong. You find yourself, when you wake up in the morning, 7 in the morning, 5 in the morning, whatever time you get up, you wake up and you're like, oh man, I'm in the middle of my pillow, I'm laying in drool, and also, worse than that, something dead has crawled into my mouth, right? And so I'm laying there breathing morning breath into my pillow and then breathing it back in, right? It's a nasty thing. Morning breath, nasty thing. Paul says you don't want to have words that are like morning breath coming out of your mouth. Nothing rotten, nothing putrid, nothing gross like that, because there's nothing good about morning breath, right? I mean, can you think of one thing? No, there's nothing. It's a nasty thing. And so Paul says, don't let anything unwholesome come out of your mouth. Now, I say that, and when you think about it in terms of your words, and there may be things that come to your mind, I'm just going to suggest two kind of broad areas of unwholesome talk, okay? There's a lot of different ones that we could use, but I'm just going to mention two. One kind of broad area of unwholesome talk is what I would call slander and gossip, all right? I think those kind of things go together. Slander, gossip, two things where you kind of are talking about other people when they're not there with you, right? And you're doing it in negative ways. Slander and gossip are unwholesome things. All they do is tear down and weaken. Do they help anybody? No. They don't help you as the person saying it. They're not good for the person who it's being said about, the victim. It's not good for the third party that you're talking to, right? This go-between. It's not good for anybody. Slander and gossip it's unwholesome. It's like breathing morning breath into your drooly pillow. That's what it's like. That's one area. Here's another area, and this is probably the first one that comes to your mind. It's probably the first one that comes to my mind. Kind of a broad area of coarseness and abusive language and obscenities, okay? Kind of crude things that we sometimes use with our words. And, I tell this to our kids all the time. Not all the time, but regularly. I say to our kids, I have never met anybody who uses that type of language, routinely, crude, coarse. I've never met anybody who my opinion of them improved because of the way that they talk. I've never thought, wow, that person's really smart. That person's, wow, I want to be like them, right? I've never thought that to myself when I'm around a person like that. In virtually every case, at least for me, it makes the person seem a little bit smaller. It makes them less than what they could mean. I do not mean that like in this superiority way. I don't mean it like that. I have pity for them because I look at them and I listen to them and I think you could be so much more, right? With your words, with your vocabulary, and yet they've chosen to do it that way instead of to use healthy words. And here's the thing. We live in a very coarse culture, right? I don't have to tell you that because you live it. You work on a factory floor, you work in an office, right? You work in the teacher's lounge or whatever it is. You're at school, right? I know how it is for you kids at school. It is a coarse culture that you live in. One of the things that has disappointed me in the last 10 years about the political rise of our current president is his potty mouth, right? He's got potty mouth. And I think probably lots of politicians have that, right? But most of them have always kind of kept it behind closed doors, in private. But Mr. Trump comes right out in front in his rallies. He's as coarse and crude as everybody else that you hear in the world today, in your workplaces, in the places where you live. And Mr. Trump, he has the opportunity to raise the level of discourse in our culture, in our country, but he's chosen not to. He's chosen to drop it. Not to be outdone Just this past week, I saw an article on Politico online that the Democrats, the opposite party, have decided that the reason why they lost in the fall is because they didn't cuss enough. They decided that the reason to beat the other party next time is to cuss more. That's what we need to do. That'll do it. That's a winning strategy. I think about that, and I just think, that's the world's way. That's the way the culture is. Who can outcuss the other guy? And we live in the middle of that. I know that you live in the, you guys in school, I think about you kids in school, and it is brutal. I know. You're walking down the halls. It's brutal as a middle school and a high school student to hear the things that you have to hear. It's brutal on your factory floor. It's brutal in your office sometimes. I know that. Here's the thing. I am glad that you are there. I'm glad that you students are there. Because you have the opportunity to raise the level of discourse in your hallways and in your classrooms and in your cubicle area. You are the ones who have the opportunity to raise the level of that. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, Paul says. And you have the opportunity to do that. When Paul writes those words to the Christians at Ephesus, they lived in the same crude, coarse, mean culture that you live in, that you work in, right? And Paul says, you don't look like them. Look different than everybody else around you. Keep reading verse 29. Don't let any unwholesome talk come out of your mouths, but only what is helpful for building others up according to their needs, that it may benefit those who listen. In other words, instead of rotten words, instead of foul words, decaying words, instead of morning breath coming out of your mouth, Paul says, let words come out that strengthen other people, that build other people up, that make other people better. So what does that look like for you and me? In a nutshell, here's what I think it means. It means that you and I try to use words that help the people around us become more like Jesus. To become more like, that their words help to produce in them a Christ-like character that's more than it would have been before. And what does that look like in real life? Here's a couple of ways that you as passionate followers can build each other up and other people up. Here's one. We've talked about this before, but I think it's important to mention it. Spend twice as much time encouraging other people as you think you need to. Twice as much time encouraging as you think you need to. We've talked about this stat before. For every, psychologists tell us, for every 5 positive, how do I say this? People feel valued and supported and appreciated when they hear 5 positive comments, 5 positive encouragements for every negative encouragement that they hear in their life, every day. All right? Does that make sense? That's when people feel appreciated and valued. If they have 5 positives for every negative. Now, I want you to think about this. I couldn't find a stat that said how many negative things a person hears a day. All right? How many put downs, how many criticisms. I couldn't find a stat. So let's make one up. All right? This is just for kicks and giggles. Let's pretend that every person hears 3 negative comments about them a day. Okay? 3 negatives. How many positives do they need to make up for that in order to feel valued and appreciated? Math problem? 16. Thank you very much. You failed. 15. Yeah, 15. Maybe I misheard. I'm deaf. 15 positive comments a day. If you hear 3 negatives, 15 positive is what you would need. Let me ask you a question. How many people hear 15 positive comments about themselves every day? Do you? I bet not many. That's my guess. Not many at all hear 15. And do I think that people hear more than 3 negatives a day? I sure do. I think that's a super low number. Here's the point. What can we expect from the coarseness of our culture? What can we expect from a morning breath culture? We expect negatives. Who is the people who need to be the ones to make up the difference? It's us. It's us as followers of Jesus. Passionate people who believe in what Jesus said and believed in the kind of person that he is, who believe in a character of a God who says, give out words that are helpful and positive and cheerful and encouraging without expecting anything back. We're the ones who are called to make up the difference in other people's lives. And so spend twice as much time encouraging people as you think that you need to, because you just can't do it enough. Here's the other suggestion I would give you for helping build others up. Make gratitude a non-negotiable element of your vocabulary. Saying thank you. I see you. I hear you. I noticed what you did, and I appreciate that. Thank you. You know what gratitude does when you do that over and over and over? When you tell people thank you? When you tell people thank you, it is an automatic reinforcement to them that what they did was important and that it matters and that it was a good thing. And what do? Anytime you get something reinforced in your life? You want to do it again. When you say thank you, you are helping build up that other person because they want to repeat that behavior that got them thanked. It makes them better people when you say thank you to them. And so I want to encourage you as a passionate follower of Jesus to be extravagant with your thank yous. Be extravagant with your appreciation for people and telling them that they matter and that they're important and that who they are and what they do has made a difference in your lives. There's 100 other examples that I could give of different ways that we could help to build other people up. But the point really is simple. When it comes to talking with people, whether it's in person like we're doing now or once you go outside or whether it's online, your ability to communicate is a powerful tool that God has given you. It's a gift. So let the content, let the actual words that you speak, let them be something that builds other people up. Okay? That's the content piece. And let's talk just briefly about the second piece. That's the content. Let's talk about our tone. Because in a lot of ways, our tone, the way that we say these words, the way that we produce this content is just as important, if not more important, than the actual words that we use. The way that we say them is giant. Years ago, and I'm embarrassed to tell you this, but I'm going to anyways. Years ago, at my first church, we had just finished up a full week's worth of children's programming during the summer. It was VBS, I think, maybe is what it was. And everybody's exhausted, all right? All the leaders are exhausted. I'm exhausted. The volunteer leader of the program is exhausted, and we're in cleanup mode, all right? All the kids have gone home with their parents, and all the adults and the teenagers are still back in the building. We're in the auditorium, and we're doing tear down, clean up, and putting all kinds of stuff away. And we got this one piece of equipment as a part of this week. It's kind of a big, I'm not even going to describe what it is, just big and awkward. It's a weird piece to handle. It's heavy. And the volunteer leader kind of yells across the auditorium to me, Nate, what do you think we should do? Where should we store this thing? I was exhausted. I was stressed out about different things. I was in a bad mood about different. I actually just relatively recently found out about my kidney disease. Nobody else knew it really except a couple of us. So I was stressed. I had all kinds of things going on in my life. She yelled out, and I'm exhausted. She yelled out, Nate, where do you think we should store this thing? And I snapped at her. And very curtly, harshly, I yelled back, I don't care where we put the thing. Everybody froze in the auditorium, kind of looked over. And to this lady's credit, she didn't yell back. She didn't say anything. She just looked at me with a kind of a hurt look in her eyes. And she made the decision herself and went and put it away. We finished up the job and went home. And the words themselves that I used, I don't really care where we put the thing. I could have used a totally different tone. And those words actually would have been okay, right? I really don't care. We could put it anywhere, right? But I didn't do that. I snapped at her. I don't care where we put this. And you know what my tone communicated to her? We could put that thing on a bonfire. That'd be fine. I don't care about it. I don't care about you. The words that you say, the tone that you use makes a giant difference in the communication skills that we have with people in our office and in our school and on our work floor. I'm embarrassed to say that day I failed, and we reconciled the next week, and I apologized to her, And we made things right. But you know what? It was never the same after that. No matter how much I wanted it to be, and even no matter how much she wanted it to be made right, it was never the same. And I'm sad about that. I'm sad about that still today. Because my tone was off. And so let me ask you a question and read a scripture for you too. Here's how the writer of Proverbs says it in chapter 15. He says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." What does the tone of your voice communicate to other people? Do you come across as bitter all the time? Do you come across as impatient? Are you the crabby one at work? No. The way you may be saying perfectly fine words, but if you are coming across as bitter and crabby and impatient and mean, it doesn't matter how nice the words are. All they're going to hear is how you're saying it. And so think about that. Think about your tone. Here's how Paul in Colossians 4 said. He said, "Let your conversation be always full of grace, seasoned with salt." Some of us need to do a seasoning check on the way that we talk, right? You're cooking a dish, you're cooking soup. I love to cook different kinds of soup, right? Halfway through the meal, what do you have to do? Halfway through the cooking, you got to take a taste and see how it tastes. Some of us need to do that with our speech, with our tone, the way that we're communicating with people. Do we need to add some salt? Do we need to add some grace? Do we need to add some gentleness, some kindness? What's you? What is your tone like? What would other people say? Might be a good exercise today to ask your spouse or a significant friend, how do I come across most of the time in conversation? Right? Answer me honestly. Be a good question to ask. Here's what we're going to do. Just for a few minutes, this is going to be perfect. I'm going to give you a chance to talk. All right? I want you to get into groups of about 4 people. 4 people is like the ideal size because they'll give you just enough time to talk. And we're going to talk in small groups. It could be your group, like your row. You may have to turn around to get 3 or 4 people. I want you to talk about these questions that are going to be on the screen. We're going to do 5 minutes of it, and then I'll wrap us up. I want you to talk about these questions. Put them up, would you? Can you get them up? Yeah, there we go. Which of these areas, this is what I want you to answer with your group. Which of these areas, edifying content or gracious tone, do you find harder, more difficult, and why? And what's one way you can be more intentional about using your ability to communicate generously and open-handed? All right? 5 minutes, get in your group, go. Right there. About 1 minute. 1 minute. Oh, timer's up there. Excellent. You can carry on this conversation in the lobby or right here in your seat after you're done. Let me leave you with this thought. Over the last 15, 20 years, you have been incredibly generous financially as a church, in my opinion. Okay? What would it look like if we were intentionally as generous with our words, with our encouragement, with the grace that we pass out, with the tone of our voice? What if we are intentionally as good at that as we are at giving financially to different things? That'd make a difference, wouldn't it? It'd make a difference in this room. It would make a difference in your neighborhood, in your office. Wow, what a privilege God has given us to be able to speak as human beings instead of like guinea pigs, right? Let's use that and get all the potential out of it that we can as followers of Jesus. Let me pray for you that you would do that. God, be with us this morning as your followers, as people who love you, who have committed our life to you. God, you have come to earth, and your son Jesus has lived a life that never said a bad word about anybody, right? Lord, that had the right tone every time. Help us to be people like that, of encouragement and challenge at times, but help us to do all of that in love always. God, we're thankful for the ability to communicate. Help us to use it with open hands. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. You are dismissed. Have a great week. We love you.